originally published mainly in ecofeminism.
Yeah, that's right. I guess technically I'm a sociologist, but I've always felt it important to link lived life with academic work. And some of my early working experiences were with Indigenous people, Aboriginal people in Australia. And I was also a mother while I was a student. And I had a lot of reflection about this and the meaning of this. And these very practical, down-to-earth experiences kind of melded with my reading of Marxist theory and teaching Marxist theory, and particularly also feminist epistemology. Those would be the main early influences on how I arrived at this idea of combining feminism with ecology. And particularly an early campaign at that point was the struggle against uranium mining in Australia, which was both a big issue for parents of children because of the toxics and so forth, but also for Indigenous communities who were displaced by mining activities. So this kind of led me into, I started to become an ecologist. And I noticed reading the theory of, reading the journal Environmental Ethics and the sort of philosophies of ecology, that particularly the deep ecologists, who were the most radically worked out position, they were quite oblivious to social domination, forms of social domination, whether of people of other races or genders, or the question of class also didn't feature there. So I got involved in a debate with challenging the deep ecologists from a gender perspective and class perspective, and this debate ran on in the journal Environmental Ethics for about 10 years in the USA, and I guess I made a bit of a name for ecofeminism at that point. I was also, at that time, early in my career, an editor of the journal Thesis 11, which is a Marxist journal, and found a lot of difficulty getting my Marxist colleagues thinking about ecological stuff, and eventually moved across and helped set up the journal Capitalism, Nature, Socialism in the USA, where the ecological question would be central to the new theorizations of Marxist critique. Another really important experience shaping my ecological feminism would be the Rio Earth Summit, which occurred in Brazil in 1992. And here, this really deepened my understanding of the contradictions of the development process. And I began to think now of four movements moving forward in one: feminist movement, workers' movement, Marxism, ecology, and what have I left out? The post-colonial experience. So in my first book in 1997, called Ecofeminism as Politics, it's actually a critique of existing Marxist theory to that point for its failure to find a way to integrate these cutting-edge social movements which are moving forward at our time in history now, and are still moving forward. And in fact, the experience of 1992 at Rio was kind of reinforced with the emergence of the World Social Forum as a movement for alternative globalization, starting off at the turn of the new millennium. Yeah, so the passage through ecological feminism has been many twists and turns, but always with a view to integrate people's efforts to make social change.
And how does this alternative globalization movement link with the interest in degrowth in Europe at the moment?
Interesting question. They don't really meet, which they are both responses to environmental crisis, and they are both, if you like, focused on the logic of production, of reproduction as distinct from production. I should just backtrack a little and say that in the 1997 book, I tried to propose that the focus on production in classic Marxist sociology should be counterbalanced with an analysis of the logic of reproduction and reproductive structures. And this is the step that actually, and reproductive labour, this is what enables you to integrate the different movements together, because everybody is involved in questions of survival in everyday life, and these in turn are embedded in ecological processes. So any kind of theorizations which doesn't link into that level of, you could call it political ecology actually, the new discipline of political ecology is starting to go there, is not going to be very useful to us. So on the basis of distinguishing between production and reproduction, for sure, the movements of movements, as they call themselves, in the alternative globalization process, the World Social Forum, are certainly on about maintaining the conditions of reproduction, but and so is the degrowth movement. It's a movement about saying, yes, well, we live in an advanced capitalist society and there are problems, there are financial problems and ecological crises. How can we respond? And so the response of degrowth is simply to contract back in consumption and to find simpler, less ecologically damaging ways of dealing with human needs. But the degrowth movement is still very, what I would say, androcentric or anthropocentric. It's focused very much from a human point of view. It doesn't take in a biocentric frame. So in a sense, it's repeating the assumptions which are causing the problem in the first place, and it's going to need to be deepened. It's also, whereas the peoples in the alternative globalization movement are biocentric thinkers, pretty much, and particularly the ecological feminists and particularly the indigenous groupings are pushing the other movements in that direction. The other issue with the degrowth movement is that it's still a little bit instrumental rational. It's still, which goes along with being anthropocentric. It still has many assumptions about human mastery of nature, sort of taken for granted assumptions, whereas the logic of reproduction is rather seeing humans as part of nature, nature in embodied form, and facilitating nature, being a catalyst within nature itself, a kind of logic of reciprocity. So this is a bit of a contrast between those two movement approaches at the moment. The degrowth movement, both of them are addressing the question of the thermodynamic processes in nature which are damaged by Western production methods, but there's a lot of work for the degrowth people to do. The other thing is, of course, it is gender blind. There is no incorporation of the insights of the feminist movement, or how will men and women play respective roles in the degrowth future. And interestingly enough, I don't think any of the histories of the degrowth movement that I've seen so far are actually acknowledging that it was the ecological feminists, and particularly German ones, writing in the 1970s and 80s, who first mapped out a degrowth position. They called it the subsistence perspective. But that should be acknowledged. And so it's symptomatic of where we're at.
And how does this feed into your research at the College?
Yes, well, as I said, I've always used my work as an academic as a resource for my activism, because I'm more committed to a just and sustainable society that I am to building a big career. But, and so some of the things which have pulled me along the way, drawn me, were, of course, the genetic engineering issue. And I did a lot of work on that, including infiltrating government committees as an ethicist to try to get at some alternative thinking going there. And also I've done a lot of work on climate and in trying to embed the interpretation of the climate crisis into the movement, the logic of reproduction and the analysis of the four movements, and again with the suggestion that we will not make any headway on the climate question until we can work together with the four movements with a logic of reproduction. Another sort of academic application of the ecological feminist work was becoming involved with the Society for Ecological Economics and discovering in the New Delhi major international conference how what a great lack of gender analysis existed there, and also that the assumption that you could simply put ecology and economics together and make a new discipline was very naive. And so I spent a lot of time critiquing that as a discipline, trying to spell out in minute form the differences between the discourse of economics and the discourse of ecology. And the book which we brought out in 2009 called Eco-Sufficiency and Global Justice, which is also a degrowth book, although I don't think the word is actually used, was put together by myself and a number of international ecofeminist scholars. And it throws the gauntlet to ecological economics. I have to say our ecological economist friends haven't taken up the challenge yet. But everything takes time. So what am I doing here? All that is really by way of background. I guess in the last year I've been looking at, of course we had Rio plus 20, which was 20 years revisiting Rio 1992, and the big agenda on the government, UN, corporation side was to propose a green economy, that the global financial and environmental crises could be fixed at the same time if we developed a green economy. So I've been very involved in analysing the internal contradictions of this, and it is, in my opinion, basically an hegemonic exercise, a holding operation, if you like. And here, my work, my research in the colleague has continued that, but here I've been looking at a slightly different direction, although related to the green economy, which is called Earth System Governance. And it's a very ambitious research program which has evolved out of the Netherlands and is very effectively spreading in university centres around the world, and really looking at what kinds of Earth system governance looks at what kinds of institutional changes and legal changes would need to be made around the world to promote the objectives of the green economy, although they don't actually talk about green economy. But the two things, the two processes are kind of moving hand in hand. It involves consideration of the role of the UN, the future role of the UN. Should it be a major factor in global governance? Should the United Nations Environment Programme be boosted and made bigger? Should environmental issues be subject to free trade requirements? Should that be the basic frame? These are questions which the Earth System Governance people are looking at. It is a very Eurocentric approach, and it is very much takes for granted the notion that the kind of high-tech civilization that we have, the ecological modernization that we have, will continue, and that the recipe is to be found in there. So have been beavering away, and I've produced one paper already, and I have another almost ready to go, and there will be a lot more to say about this, because it's very critical, because these people who are designing these global political programs are going to they're designing our future. Yeah, so.
Well, thank you.